It all started with a loud clatter in my garage at 6 in the morning. I'd barely had a sip of coffee when the sound of metal scraping concrete jolted me upright. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburban development outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, a place where the worst thing that usually happens is someone forgetting trash day. I threw on a hoodie and jogged down the stairs, barefoot. My garage door was still shut, but I could hear rustling inside. That wasn't normal. I hadn't opened it since last night when I parked my truck. I yanked open the interior door to the garage and froze. There, standing in the middle of my garage like she owned the place, was Brenda Atwell, our HOA secretary and self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Mid-50s, platinum blonde bob, pastel cardigan, and that permanent sour expression like she just sniffed expired milk. She had a clipboard in one hand and a plastic storage bin in the other. "What the hell are you doing in my garage?" I shouted. She didn't even flinch. "Thomas McAllister, you left your side door unlocked. That's a safety hazard. I'm repurposing this space temporarily for HOA storage. We've run out of room in the clubhouse." I blinked. "You broke into my garage." "It's not breaking in if the door is open," she said, setting the bin down on my workbench like she hadn't just committed trespassing. "And as a member of the HOA, you are contractually obligated to support community needs." "I didn't sign up to be your storage locker," I snapped. "Get out, now." Brenda clicked her pen and started writing on her clipboard. "You're being uncooperative, Tom." "That's a violation of Article 7, Section 3, failure to comply with community requests." "I'm about 5 seconds away from calling the cops," I warned. She paused, looked at me like I was a disobedient golden retriever and said, "That's not necessary. I'm going to document this incident and bring it to the board's attention, but I'll remove the bin." She didn't remove the bin. After she walked out slowly, like she was doing me a favor, I locked every door and called my buddy, Cal, who's a deputy sheriff. He told me point blank, "That's criminal trespass. Doesn't matter if the door was unlocked." I filed a police report that day. 2 days later, I got a letter taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead and signed by Brenda herself. According to the letter, I was being fined $250 for non-cooperation with an emergency storage directive. There was no such thing in the bylaws. I checked. I printed out the police report, took a photo of the bins still in my garage, and showed up at the next HOA meeting, which Brenda ran like a dictator with a megaphone. "I'd like to speak," I said when she tried to skip public comments. Brenda sighed loudly. "Only if it's relevant to community business." "Oh, it is." I walked up to the front of the room, pulled out the police report, and read it aloud to the room full of neighbors. Brenda's face went pale. "This is a report of criminal trespass," I said calmly, "on my property, by Brenda Atwell. She entered my garage without permission and stored HOA materials without my knowledge. Then she fined me for not agreeing to it." Someone in the back said, "Wait, what?" Brenda tried to cut in. "That's a mischaracterization." "No, Brenda. This is your signature on the fine notice, and this is the police report. I've already spoken to a lawyer and I'm pursuing charges. You don't get to use your position to break into people's homes." The room got real quiet. Then Mr. Wendell, the retired Navy vet who lives 2 doors down from me, stood up. "I've lived here 20 years, he said. "Ain't never seen anything like this. Tom, if you need someone to testify, I'm in." Brenda's voice cracked. "This is all being taken out of context. As HOA secretary, I had provisional authority to—" "You had none," I interrupted. "And now you're going to find out what happens when you abuse your power." The next morning, I woke up to find the bin gone, but not before I'd taken plenty of pictures. I also found a new letter in my mailbox. This one wasn't from Brenda. It was from the HOA president, Ron, who'd apparently been on vacation in Florida during the whole fiasco. He'd called an emergency meeting. At that meeting, with nearly the whole neighborhood in attendance, I laid everything out: dates, times, photos, the police report, the fine notice. Brenda sat stiffly in her seat, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. Ron looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Brenda, you entered his garage without permission. I was acting in the community's best interest, she hissed. Did you have board approval? I don't need board approval for everything. You do when it involves private property, Ron said, audibly rattled. I could tell the room was turning. They'd all had their run-ins with Brenda over the years: unapproved plants, holiday decorations taken down, threats of fines for lawn chairs left out too long. This time, though, she'd gone too far. I didn't stop there. I showed them security camera footage I'd installed after the break-in. It clearly showed Brenda entering my backyard, opening my side door and walking into the garage with a tote bin. She'd done it like she'd done it before. Looks like this wasn't her first rodeo, I said, mister. Wendell stood up again. I want a vote, effective immediately, remove Brenda Atwell from the board. The room erupted in agreement. Ron looked like he was about to cry. We'll follow proper procedure, but yes, there will be a vote. I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't done yet. I also press charges, I said. So whether she's on the board or not, she'll be explaining herself to a judge. Brenda stood up with a screech of her chair. You're all ungrateful. I kept this neighborhood in shape for years. You tried to turn it into your own kingdom, someone muttered. She stormed out, but not before knocking over a pitcher of water on the refreshment table. After the meeting, people I barely knew came up to shake my hand. About time someone stood up to her, one neighbor said. We should have done this years ago, said another. All I could think about was how casually she'd walked into my garage like it was hers. That arrogance. It wasn't just about a plastic bin, it was about control, and I wasn't having it. 2 weeks after the emergency meeting, Brenda's street was noticeably quieter. No more daily walks with her clipboard. No more early morning emails to the HOA listserv with subject lines like urgent, unapproved mailbox flag, or possible paint shade violation. She'd gone radio silent after the board suspended her duties pending the vote to remove her entirely. Most people assumed she was too embarrassed to show her face. I knew better. I'd seen the look in her eyes when she left that meeting. That wasn't embarrassment. That was planning. The day after the vote was announced, I came home from the night shift at the hospital, 12 hours in the ER, covered in other people's bad luck, and found my mailbox door hanging open. Inside was a typed, unsigned letter. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper folded once. It read, "You made a mistake, we don't forget." That was it. No name, no signature, just a thinly veiled threat. I stood there, sweaty scrubs still clinging to my back, reading it over twice. The paper had a faint lavender scent like cheap perfume. My jaw tightened. Brenda was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. I didn't bother calling the police this time. I drove straight to the county clerk's office and filed for a protective order. At that point, the criminal case was still pending. The detective assigned had already reviewed the footage I'd submitted and interviewed my neighbors. I knew better than to expect a quick resolution, but the DA's office seemed interested enough to keep digging, especially once I handed them a copy of that note. Things escalated 4 days later when my neighbor, Miss Guerrero, knocked on my door holding a manila folder. "I think this belongs to you," she said, frowning. It was inside my recycling bin. I only opened it because it had your name on it. Inside were several sheets of HOA meeting minutes, except they had been altered. My backyard was circled in red marker on one of the maps, and there were notes scribbled in the margins. Potential easement, and could be used for auxiliary storage if rezoned. I stared at the papers, heart rate ticking up. "These are from before the last meeting," she nodded. "Looks like February. That's not how they're supposed to be stored." I took the folder and thanked her. I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing those altered documents with the official ones on the HOA website. Sure enough, they didn't match. Brenda had edited them badly. She'd added a fake agenda item proposing use of member-owned garages as temporary community annex space, citing a bogus emergency clause about storage overflow. None of it had ever been discussed or voted on, the kicker. She'd backdated them. I called the detective again. "You might want to look at this," I said. By the end of the week, the DA filed an additional charge, falsifying public records. That changed the whole tone of the investigation. It wasn't just trespassing anymore, it was fraud. Meanwhile, the HOA licked its wounds. Ron, the president, called me personally to apologize. "I didn't know she was doing any of that," he said. "I believe you," I said, "but I also think you stopped paying attention." He paused for a long time. "You're right. I wasn't trying to take over the HOA, but I couldn't just sit back either. I filed a motion with the board to require all future HOA records to be submitted digitally to a third-party archiving service, one that couldn't be tampered with. I also proposed limiting board members to 2 consecutive terms and requiring at least 3 board signatures for any financial decision over $500. At the next meeting, my proposals passed with overwhelming support. Brenda's removal vote passed unanimously. Even Ron voted yes. She didn't show up, but her influence hadn't evaporated completely. A few of her closest allies, mostly the retirees who treated HOA enforcement like a full-time job, started circulating a rumor that I was trying to corporatize the neighborhood. Whatever that meant. They claimed I was planning to install rental units in my backyard and turn the community into a hospital worker commune. I heard this from Miss Guerrero, who laughed so hard telling me she nearly dropped her groceries. "Do I look like I want to run a commune?" I asked, lifting a bag of mulch off her porch. "Honestly, you'd probably do a better job than Brenda," she replied. A week later, I got an unexpected call from Detective Arlo. He'd been quiet for a while, which usually meant progress. "We've found something you should know about," he said. Apparently, Brenda hadn't just broken into my garage, she had a pattern. Over the last 3 years, several residents had reported missing items from their backyard's garden tools, potted plants, even a lawn gnome. The reports were dismissed due to lack of evidence. But now, with the investigation open, Arlo had obtained a warrant to search her property. They found a storage shed behind her house packed with items labeled by address, mine included. The tote bin she'd left in my garage wasn't the only one. There were 7 more, each marked with the names of various neighbors. Inside were HOA documents, personal items, and even a few unopened Amazon packages. The working theory: Brenda had been slowly stockpiling evidence she could use against residents at will. Her own personal HOA blackmail archive. I sat on my porch with the report in my lap, stunned. She hadn't just been power-hungry, she'd built a whole surveillance operation inside a plastic shed. The DA added theft and unlawful surveillance to her charges. Her attorney tried to argue she was overzealous in her duties. The judge didn't buy it. When the trial date was announced, I wasn't surprised to see half the neighborhood RSVP to the public hearing. People were angry, not just at Brenda, but at the way they'd let things slide for so long. At the hearing, I testified first. I didn't hold back. I described the break-in, the forged documents, the threatening note. I explained how she manipulated fear to maintain control, how she exploited trust to build a system where no one questioned her authority. Brenda didn't look at me once. Other neighbors testified too. Miss Guerrero spoke about finding the altered minutes. Mr. Wendell described how she once threatened to fine him $300 for putting up a flag 2 days early. Even Ron, clearly shaken, admitted he'd let her run wild because she made the trains run on time. In the end, the court ruled in favor of the charges. Brenda was ordered to pay restitution, sentenced to community service, and banned from holding any position of authority in a homeowners association. Ever. Afterward, people trickled out of the courthouse with this strange mix of relief and disbelief. For the first time in years, the community felt like it belonged to us again. A month later, I came home from another ER shift to find something new in my yard: a handmade wooden sign staked near my mailbox. It read, "HOA Hero, thanks Tom." I stood there in the moonlight, exhausted but smiling as Miss Guerrero waved from her porch across the street. Brenda's house went up for sale the next week. No one visited the open house. Eventually, an out-of-state couple bought it. They never asked about the previous owner. We didn't tell them. 3 months passed after the trial, and things in the neighborhood settled into a quieter rhythm. The HOA, now under new leadership, started operating like a normal administrative body instead of a shadow government. People used to whisper at meetings, now they actually spoke. The board had adopted my proposed reforms, and for the first time in years, residents felt comfortable asking questions without fearing retaliation. Brenda's name barely came up anymore until the county audit arrived. It started with a letter. Ron called me one evening, his voice tight and uncertain. He didn't usually reach out unless there was something serious. "We got flagged during the annual financial review," he said. "The county found discrepancies in the HOA's filings. Some of it goes back 5 years. I leaned against my porch railing, watching the last streaks of light fade behind the trees. How bad? There are checks that were never deposited into the HOA's account, funds withdrawn without board signatures. And a secondary account we didn't know existed. The silence between us stretched a little too long. "You think Brenda set it up?" I asked. "She was treasurer before she became secretary," Ron said. "She had access. No one ever questioned her because she handled all the billing." But the numbers don't add up. The next day, I met Ron and the new treasurer, Alina, at the community clubhouse. Alina had a background in municipal finance and had been auditing the books ever since Brenda was removed. She laid out 2 spreadsheets on the table, one from the official HOA account and one from the mystery account the county discovered. "There are over 30 separate transactions," she said, tapping a column. "Checks made out to Community Services Fund and auxiliary maintenance, but no work orders, no receipts. The funds were withdrawn in cash." "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Alina looked up. "Just over $72,000. I sat back, my fingers curling around the edge of the chair. "That's not just mismanagement, that's embezzlement." Ron nodded grimly. "We already filed a report with the county sheriff." They handed it off to the Financial Crimes Unit. It didn't take long for the investigation to gain steam. The evidence was overwhelming. Brenda had created a shell account under a near-duplicate name of a legitimate HOA vendor and funneled dues into it for at least 3 years. She'd hidden it by issuing fake invoices, then shredding the originals after marking them as paid. The most astonishing part: she'd used residents' own complaints as her cover story, filing bogus emergency repairs to justify the withdrawals. Gutters that were never replaced. Sidewalks that were never resurfaced. A phantom pest control service that billed every quarter but never showed up. The district attorney added felony embezzlement and wire fraud to her existing charges. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea, but the DA wasn't interested. At the next HOA meeting, Alina presented the findings in full. People were stunned but not surprised. Not anymore. "I feel like we were conned," said Mr. Renner, a quiet man from the corner lot. "She acted like every dollar was sacred. She fined my wife for leaving a rake on the porch, and now we find out she stole thousands." "I want to know if we're getting that money back," said a younger woman near the front. Alina answered calmly. "We've filed for restitution. If there's anything left in the account, the DA will seize it. But realistically, we may only recover a portion." I raised my hand. "We need to go after her bond." Ron nodded. Already in motion, her position required a fidelity bond. If the claims approved, the insurance should cover part of the losses. People murmured, some relieved, others still angry. But no one questioned Alina. That alone told me how far we'd come. Later that week, I heard a knock at my door just after sunset. It was Detective Arlo, the same officer who'd handled the original break-in. "You'll want to hear this," he said, stepping inside. He handed me a copy of a search warrant inventory. They'd just executed a warrant on a storage unit registered under Brenda's maiden name in a neighboring town. Inside were HOA documents, a safe containing over $15,000 in cash, and a set of handwritten ledgers. She kept records of every transaction, Arlo said, down to the penny. She was laundering HOA dues through a fake maintenance company, then paying herself out in cash. I scanned the papers. Why keep records at all? She liked control. Probably thought she was untouchable. That illusion shattered the following week when Brenda was arrested again, this time in her new rental home on the outskirts of Chapel Hill. The news story broke the next morning, complete with a mugshot. Our local paper ran the headline, HOA official accused of embezzling over $70K from neighborhood residents. At the next board meeting, Alina passed around a draft resolution, a full forensic audit of the HOA's last 10 years of financials. No one objected. Ron approached me afterward. "You ever think about running for the board?" "No thanks," I said. "I prefer my battles surgical," he laughed. "We could use someone who doesn't scare easy. I'll keep the suggestion in my back pocket." The trial date for the embezzlement charges was set for the following spring. Meanwhile, residents began organizing a neighborhood improvement committee, this time led by volunteers, not enforcers. They started with a community garden in the old tennis court lot and a tool sharing program for lawn equipment. People who'd once avoided each other over mailbox disputes now swapped extension cords and tomato seedlings. One afternoon, as I walked past the garden plots, I noticed a new sign next to the bulletin board. It listed upcoming community projects: benches, a mural, a seasonal food drive. At the bottom, someone had added in bold letters, "No more secrets, no more tyrants, this is our neighborhood." I couldn't have said it better myself. A few nights later, I was back in my garage cleaning out shelves and rearranging tools. The spot where Brenda had once dropped her bin was now a workbench for my side carpentry projects. As I sorted through a box of old screws, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mr. Wendell. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He handed me a small wooden plaque. It was carved with the words "Neighborhood Watchdog" and featured a tiny engraved camera in the corner. "Couple of us chipped in," he said. "You kept us sane when we didn't even realize we'd gone numb." I ran my thumb over the engraving. "I just didn't want to get steamrolled. That's what makes you dangerous to people like her." We stood in silence for a moment, the late evening breeze drifting through the open garage. "You know," he said, "for a while I thought you were just another quiet guy who kept to himself." "I was," he smiled. "Yeah, but then they pushed the wrong button. By the time spring rolled around, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, most of the homes were the same, but in the energy. Kids rode bikes down the sidewalks without parents nervously watching for clipboard patrols. People planted flowers that weren't in the HOA guidebook. Holiday decorations went up without incident, and the fines. They dropped to nearly zero. Brenda's sentencing came in June. The court ordered her to repay over $60,000, serve 2 years probation, and complete 200 hours of community service, ironically, many of them to be served in neighborhood improvement programs. When asked if she had anything to say, she offered a monotone apology that no one believed. "I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to." Justice had already arrived, slowly, methodically, and with the weight of truth behind it. That summer, I added a new project to my garage, a cabinet with a lock labeled HOA Archives. Inside, I kept copies of every document I'd collected: photos, letters, invoices, court filings. Not because I expected more trouble, but because I'd learned something. Power unchecked doesn't just corrupt, it festers. It spreads in silence, behind closed doors, in bins tucked into garages that don't belong to you, but it only takes one person to drag it into the light, and once it's exposed, it doesn't stand a chance. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when I noticed the unfamiliar sedan parked across the street from my house. Tinted windows, dealer plates, engine idling even though no one was inside. One of those details that doesn't feel wrong exactly, just misplaced. I stood on my front porch, wiping off a pair of work gloves, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then the driver's door opened, and a man in his late 30s stepped out, wearing khakis and a navy polo with a small embroidered logo. Wake County Auditor's Office. He carried a leather folio and scanned the street like he was searching for someone. I raised a hand to get his attention. He crossed over briskly. "Thomas McAllister, that's me. I'm Kevin Frey. I'm with the county's Internal Audit Division. We're conducting a deeper review of the HOA's financials and operational conduct. Your name came up more than once during our interviews." I gestured toward the porch chairs. "You want to sit?" He nodded, settling in and flipping open his folio. "I'll be brief. We received a whistleblower complaint last month. Not about the embezzlement, that's already in the court's hands. This is separate. It concerns misuse of funds tied to a property annexation attempt that was never officially filed." I leaned forward. "You mean the easement thing?" He tilted his head. "You're aware of it then?" I found old meeting minutes Brenda tried to doctor. They suggested the HOA planned to rezone private yards, including mine, for auxiliary storage. It was never brought to a vote, and no one else on the board knew about it. Kevin nodded slowly, taking notes. "That's consistent with what we've seen. But here's the problem. Someone filed paperwork with the county land office requesting a preliminary survey to assess viability of converting several lots, including yours, into shared-use zones. There's a forged signature submitted under your name." I sat back in the chair, pulse rising. "You're telling me Brenda not only broke into my garage and stole from the HOA, she tried to claim part of my property for the association?" "Correct. And there's more. The survey request was accompanied by a check drawn from the HOA account for over $6,000. That check was signed with a stamp we traced back to a vendor Brenda hired on an emergency contract last year." I rubbed my jaw, trying to process it. "So she illegally tried to zone part of my backyard and paid for it using stolen HOA funds." Kevin closed the folio. "That's the working theory. We've opened a separate criminal investigation into property fraud. We're coordinating with the DA's office. They'll subpoena the land office next week." I shook my head. "I didn't think it could get worse." Kevin stood. "In cases like this, it usually does before it gets better." After he left, I walked through the backyard, down the narrow path Brenda had once used to enter my garage. I stared at the spot where the boundary markers were set, suddenly aware of how close I'd come to losing more than just privacy. The next morning, I called Alina. She didn't sound surprised. "I was hoping you'd call," she said. "I've been going over the HOA's archived emails. Brenda used her secretary access to bypass board approval on dozens of items, but the most concerning one. A digital invoice from a company called Southeastern Parcel Group. It billed us for zoning pre-consultation services for 5 properties, including yours." "Is the company real?" "Barely. It's a shell. Registered to a P.O. box in Durham, but the payments went through. Brenda signed off on them using a forged board authorization. Who else knows? Just me and now you. I'm looping in legal counsel today." By the end of the week, the DA's office filed 2 additional charges: attempted property fraud and misappropriation of fiduciary instruments. The judge approved a motion to treat these as separate from the embezzlement case, which meant Brenda would stand trial again. But something about this new charge struck a deeper chord in the neighborhood. Theft was one thing, this was an attempt to manipulate land ownership. That went beyond greed. That was calculated, invasive, and deeply personal. Ron called an emergency town hall. No agenda, no votes, just transparency. We met in the community center's open lawn area, folding chairs set in loose rows, people fanning themselves with old newsletters. When Ron stepped up to the mic, he didn't sound like a man trying to save face anymore. He sounded like someone finally ready to clean house. "We failed you," he said. "We gave one person too much authority, and worse, we never questioned her methods. That ends now." He turned to Alina, who stood with a laptop balanced on a portable podium. "She's going to walk you through everything we found. It's not pretty." For the next half hour, Alina laid out a timeline that made people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. the fake vendor accounts, the altered zoning maps, the diverted funds. Brenda hadn't just bent the rules, she'd created her own playbook and tricked everyone into following it. When Alina finished, I stood up. She tried to take my backyard, I said. Tried to rewrite legal documents to make it hers. If the county hadn't caught it, I'd be fighting a legal battle just to keep what I already owned. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. She did the same thing to my husband's workshop, said it extended past the property line. We thought it was just her being difficult. Another man stood. She told me I couldn't build a shed because the space had been earmarked for community use. I didn't think she meant it literally. I nodded. She did, and she used our own dues to fund it. That night, I got a message from Kevin. The county had fast-tracked the audit's final report. The conclusion was blunt: deliberate abuse of authority, concerted effort to manipulate zoning processes, and calculated financial fraud. The report recommended the HOA be placed under temporary receivership until new oversight procedures could be implemented. The next day, the court approved the recommendation. A third-party administrator was assigned to oversee all financial and legal decisions for 12 months. That effectively stripped the HOA of autonomous power. I thought that would be the end of it. Then I got a call from someone I didn't expect, Brenda's niece. Her voice trembled on the line. I heard what happened. I'm sorry. I used to help her with paperwork a few years ago. I didn't know what she was doing with it. I didn't say anything. She kept a ledger at her house. Not the one the police found, a smaller one. It had initials next to property notes. I think it was a list of who she was targeting. I can get it to you. It might help. I met her at a gas station off the highway. She handed me a small, leather-bound notebook. I flipped through it in my truck. Page after page of addresses, initials, and notes. RM, fence 3 inches over limit, uses leverage. LG late fee history, possible lien if schedule repeats. TM garage access equals storage pilot. TM, that was me. I turned the book into the DA's office. Within a week, it was entered into evidence. Brenda's second trial was quicker than the first. The evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in state prison, with restitution payments tied to her pension. The judge didn't mince words. You violated the trust of an entire community. You used your position to undermine the law and manipulate property ownership. Your actions were not just unethical, they were predatory. Outside the courthouse, news crews gathered, but residents didn't stick around for interviews. They'd already moved on. The neighborhood wasn't defined by her anymore. By summer's end, the new HOA Oversight Committee had published a complete transparency report. Every dollar spent, every decision logged, no executive decisions without full board approval, no exceptions. People started hosting block parties again. Kids chalked up the sidewalks. Someone even strung lights across the entryway sign and planted sunflowers beneath it. I built a small shed in the back corner of my yard, just for tools. But every time I locked it up, I remembered the way Brenda had walked into my garage like it belonged to her. That shed became a quiet reminder. Nothing is truly safe when apathy takes root. But vigilance, once awakened, doesn't sleep easy. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the county. They were inviting me to join a citizen advisory panel on neighborhood governance reform. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat under the porch light, rereading the letter, listening to the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally at peace with itself. Eventually, I picked up a pen. Not because I wanted to fight again, but because I knew, better than anyone, what happens when you stop paying attention.